Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you all so much for being here for our inaugural event here in the Martin Library. We are so happy to be here, grateful for Martin for hosting, and welcome to Book Sandwiched In. My name is Laura Duncombe. I am one of the co-chairs of the Book Sandwich In committee this year, and we are delighted to have this distinguished speaker who I'm actually not going to introduce. I'm going to leave a very special person to introduce him. But I just wanted to let you know this event is put on by Friends of the Library. We will be back here 1 month from today on March 10th. Sloan Davis is doing a speech on Say Anything, which is a story by Patrick Radden Keefe. He's a New York Times reporter. It's an exhaustively researched but shockingly readable accounting of the Troubles in Northern Ireland through the lens of several of the key participants on both sides of the conflict. It's a fascinating book, and I'm sure the talk will be gripping, and it will be timely because it will be almost St. Patrick's Day. So this is one of the many events put on by Friends of the Library. We do Travels with Tolson's, The Great Decisions, and a literacy program where we make sure that students in our area receive books, and for many of them, it's the first books they receive. So if you're not a friend of the library already, we would urge you to become one. The dues are as little as $10 a year. You can find all the information on the website, and your support helps fund programs like this and all the other wonderful things we do. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the president of the Friends Library, Roz Elder.
Hi. Confession, Brendan Smith is my grandson. When Brendan was a sophomore in high school, he wanted to go to space camp. Okay. So I offered him some choices, and he chose the University of Kansas in Lawrence. He attended that summer and again the next summer, and later served as a space camp counselor. All right. Naturally, Brendan attended KU because their aerospace engineering program had top ratings. He received both his Bachelor of Science, his Master of Engineering in aerospace engineering at KU. He also was part of the rocket launching team there. That was really fun to see your grandson launching a rocket. Brendan now works as a spacecraft systems engineer with Terran Orbital. I'm not kidding, Orbital in Irvine, California. By the way, this is rocket science. Welcome, Brendan.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So hi, I'm Brendan. And today I will be reviewing the short novel Orbital by Samantha Harvey. So I would like to start with some background on the author. I think it's good to understand the perspective of an author before analyzing their work. It kind of gives you some insight into why they wrote the book, where they're coming from. So Samantha Harvey was born in Kent, England in 1975. She has her MA and PhD in creative writing from Bath Spa University. She's authored 5 novels, including this one. She does not have any background in spaceflight or related scientific fields, though I believe that she worked at a museum of spaceflight in the UK at one point. But she has adeptly researched the lives of the astronauts aboard the ISS. It was interesting to find that she used her experience with the isolation of COVID as inspiration to write this book. To kind of connect that to the lives of the astronauts in orbit and how they feel separated from the rest of humanity by 250 miles. So I found this quote from her somewhat interesting. So she was concerned with her lack of experience in the field. And I think this is a fascinating bit. She said, I quote, "I've never been in space. I could never go to space. And there are humans who have been to space who write very lucidly about it. Who am I to do this? I had a crisis of confidence and felt I was trespassing." I think it is incredibly important for people outside of these original knowledge sets to be able to bring their own perspective to the table. This novel presents something that you do not typically get from NASA documentation, technical reports, crew logs, and stuff like that. This is a very human novel. It's a very human perspective on the ups, downs, and responsibilities of spaceflight and humanity in general. So I think that this is a very important novel that she's written. So the narrative. So this book covers the experience of fictional astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the International Space Station over the course of one day or 16 orbits in a day. The chapters are defined by orbit. So as you're reading through the book, your chapter titles will be either orbit, insert number here, ascending or descending. And each orbit will describe the tasks, thoughts, views, and experiences, views experienced or performed by the crew. So what they're thinking about their loved ones on Earth, what they're thinking about their tasks, what they're doing. And I think it departs from the standard narrative with a unified, cohesive plot to the benefit of the reader. So we don't really have a kind of main hook through plot that all of the kind of astronauts are following on. There's not your typical hero's journey or any kind of real narrative rail, but there are some major and minor side narratives that we can kind of follow throughout the book to give context to what the astronauts are doing, where we are in their day, so on and so forth. So the characters, I'm going to break this down by their kind of associations. So we have one NASA astronaut whose name is simply Sean. No one is assigned a last name in this book. We'll simply know them by their first names. So you have Sean from NASA. We have two cosmonauts from Roscosmos, which is the Russian equivalent of NASA. We have two ESA astronauts, which is the European Space Agency, Nell from the United Kingdom and Pietro from Italy. And then we have one JAXA, or the Japanese counterpart to NASA, Chie from Osaka, Japan. And we are basically following their insights, their views, and the experience that they bring to orbit throughout the book. So the setting, it's somewhat confusing to try and picture what the individuals are doing in this book without the context of what the ISS is. So the entirety of the novel, with some exceptions, takes place aboard the International Space Station. And so we can see here in the top left, we have the Russian segment. So this was built and produced by the Russians in the late 90s. In the bottom right is the US and international section. So that is a collection of different Canadian, United States, and European modules, as well as one Japanese module, all assembled together to create the international segment of the International Space Station. Additionally, there's other components and modules, but not super relevant for the purposes of this book. So I kind of want to go over what an orbit is. It's very key to kind of the flow of the novel. So hopefully we can teach you guys some things today if you're not familiar with how this works. I will read off some of the quotes that I have in these slides, and I'm going to try and connect it to kind of the real world explanations and how either it works or what the theories and kind of thoughts surrounding some of these are. So they were weightless, not through a lack of gravity. There's plenty of gravity here, so close to Earth, but because they were in constant state of free fall, they were not flying, but falling at over 17,000 miles per hour. So what is an orbit? It is falling. You are constantly falling. There is not a lack of gravity, but an equilibrium of gravity. So Newton is the first to, in my opinion, the best enumerator of kind of what an orbit is. So he had this thought experiment that was published posthumously in the 18th century called Newton's cannonball. And so effectively what this is you're imagining firing a cannon at a conventional speed that you would fire a cannon. The ball will follow an arc and fall to the ground. If you extrapolate up that speed to 17,000 miles per hour, that ball is going to follow that arc, but that arc is going to follow the curvature of the Earth. You will always be falling and arcing down towards the center, but you will be missing the Earth continuously and continuously and continuously. You'll stay there. And if you keep increasing that speed even more, you will escape the Earth and leave the Earth. This is how we send things to other planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. And so that is, in effect, the fundamentals of an orbit. I'm going to expand on it a little bit more because the way that orbits are analyzed in this book and used in the through narrative involves a little bit more complexity than that. So the whole globe has passed beneath and will keep on passing. With each orbit, they'll track a few degrees westward. And when the orbit comes north again in another 90 minutes, it'll be over Eastern Europe, where yet another day will break. So the ground track is effectively where the vehicle or space station in this case is over the Earth at any given time. So as you can see, that orbit in the top right corner is similar to the ISS. The orbit stays still, but as the Earth rotates throughout its day, where that orbit is changes. So as we go from one orbit to the next, we're passing over different parts of the Earth every single time. So we can see the entire globe over the course of 16 orbits or a day, as you can see in the bottom right corner here. We have 16 orbits represented there. This graphic is actually at the beginning of the book. So I recommend if you are reading through and you get to a chapter that says orbit 8, you can go back to the beginning of the book, look for orbit 8 on this diagram here, and you'll know exactly where the astronauts are at that time while reading through the novel. This is a bit of a complex kind of piece of mathematics and engineering to fully appreciate and understand why this works. But what you really need to know is basically that the thing on the bottom right is how the ISS travels around the Earth over the course of a day. On the flip side, we also have the science of the physiology. I think that this is explored not as kind of the primary theme throughout the book, but this is more of the kind of something that the astronauts are having to deal with, right? Physiology in space is very, very different from here on Earth. You take gravity for granted, but once you get to space, your body starts to change very, very drastically and very, very rapidly. So read some quotes here. They know that the vision can weaken and the bones deteriorate. Even with so much exercise, the muscles will still atrophy. And then mornings, a surge of sweat, breath, and effort, weights and bike and treadmill, the 2 hours a day when their bodies are not suspended are instead forced to comply with gravity. So every single morning for the 6 to 9 month crew rotation that the astronauts are in space, they have to wake up and spend 2 hours of their working day simply exercising to maintain their bodies so that they are able to simply walk when they come back to Earth. It is underappreciated how often simply standing up, walking to get something is exercising your muscles, exercising your bones, making sure that your spine stays strong, your back muscles support you. When you're in space, you lose that. That is gone. You're no longer exercising those muscles. Your body says, oh, I don't think I need these anymore. They begin to disappear. So a bit of kind of a quote from NASA here, a little source from NASA here, but the ISS is equipped with 3 exercise machines that are used to maintain health. So we have the advanced resistive exercise device, which is basically a bench press with a really fancy name. They have the treadmill called T2. There was a T1 treadmill, as one might imagine, but this is the T2 treadmill. And then there's the cycle ergometer with vibration and isolation and stabilization system, or SEVIS, for people who don't want to say that every time they're talking about a bike. So these are the 3 machines that are currently on the International Space Station. And astronauts wake up every day and use these extensively. And we do see the astronauts in the book talking about that and engaging with this equipment early on, right as they wake up at the beginning of their day. So I think this is kind of the main through line of the book. I think this is what the book tries to convey the most. It's the overview effect. So the overview effect is something that astronauts experience when they go to space for the first time. This was first experienced basically from the first human space flight. There's several, Yuri Gagarin, who's the very first cosmonaut and human to ever visit space, who talked about how he just no longer saw borders. He thought the Cold War that we were fighting was pointless, meaningless. We needed to work towards something greater. It was it's absolutely incredible. But it's something that it's hard to comprehend without having been to space. And it's something that I can only observe from, primary sources and try to convey to you. But this is, there are many, many quotes in this book, and I'll try to convey a few of them here. So somewhere in the middle of the book, I think, is kind of where a lot of this contemplation goes on. They're kind of taking breaks from their daily tasks. But It's the humanless simplicity of land and sea, the way the planet seems to breathe, an animal unto itself. It's the planet's indifferent turning in indifferent space, and the perfection of the sphere which transcends all language. The astronauts here are describing a world that is just completely removed from the human aspect. It is a world unto itself. Humanity is such a small component with such a big impact. And I think it's important to convey that it's our responsibility that we have to take care of this planet, right? So from space, it becomes incredibly obvious incredibly quickly that the world is incredibly fragile. It is something that does not belong to us. We don't own the planet. It is something that will continue to live and breathe without us, and to be a member of that environment is a responsibility rather than something we should just take for granted. Additionally, at night they can point to home. There's Seattle, Osaka, London, Bologna, St. Petersburg, and Moscow. Moscow, one enormous point light like the pole star in a shrill, clear sky. The night's electric excess takes their breath. The spread of life. The way the planet proclaims to the abyss that there's something more or something and someone here, and how for all that a sense of friendliness and peace prevails, since even at night there's only one man-made border in the whole of the world, a long trail of lights between Pakistan and India. That's all civilization has to show for its divisions, and even by day that is gone. It's a testament almost to humans' ingenuity to even display the border of Pakistan and India. It's one of those places on Earth that is incredibly militarized. For those who don't know, it's a large fortified border, and I think it's important to remember that, you know, once again, when you're viewing these things from space, when you look down onto the planet, it's just a small string of lights. This huge amount of aggression and hatred and pent-up rage between two societies facing each other. It's nothing but a string of lights from space. It's something that can be so easily ignored and forgotten. It's so beneath the magnitude of the rest of the world and the rest of the cosmos. I just find a lot of this book very moving and thought-provoking in regards to kind of the human condition. I think I would be remiss not to put an actual quote from a real astronaut up here. So I've added a quote from Apollo 8 astronaut Bill Anders. Apollo 8, for those who are not familiar, was the very first mission to ever leave the Earth's Earth orbit. It was the first mission to orbit the moon. They did not land, but they were the first to go way out there and be able to see the Earth in its entirety. No one had ever seen the Earth in its entire disk before the three astronauts of Apollo 8. Quote, when I looked up and saw the Earth coming upon this very stark beat up moon horizon, I was immediately almost overcome with the thought, here we came all this way to the moon, and yet the most significant thing we're seeing is our own home planet, the Earth. These are high-ranking military test pilots at this time. We don't bring scientists to space. These are people who are fighting tooth and nail in the Cold War. These are people whose entire mindset is to hate the other. They see the Earth for the first time, and it's all of the competition, all of the race, all of the everything evaporates, and they once again see the Earth for what it is. It's something that once again I don't have a personal experience with. I'm sure no one here has a personal experience with, but it's something that I think we should remember. It's real. It's just humanity needs to think about the bigger picture, and one of the most real ways to do that is from space. And I think that this book does a phenomenal job at several instances of kind of breaking that down and showing the different individual perspectives from people all over the world. So I don't want to idle on this for too long, but this is kind of the main through line of the book. If you're reading it, really, really absorb the thoughts and experiences of the astronauts described, what their views on Earth are, their relationships with one another, and so on. So kind of moving on to a little bit of a lighter topic. I think life in space is a somewhat interesting kind of situation to be in. So this is kind of two of like the more mundane things that are drastically different because you're now floating in a zero-G environment. So we have sleeping and going to the restroom. And so I quote, "They hang in their sleeping bags, a handspan away, beyond a skin of metal, the universe unfolds in simple eternities. Their sleep begins to thin, and some distant earthly morning dawns, and their laptops flash the first silent messages of a new day. Wide awake, always awake station vibrates with fans and filters." What it's somewhat hard to kind of convey to folks unfamiliar, but I will try to do so. The ISS is a vehicle. It is not a house. It is not a building. It is a vehicle. It is something that has to be maintained constantly. It requires mechanical work to upkeep. You are driving this thing through space. You are using engines to maneuver. It is a vehicle. It moves. It lives. It maneuvers. And so there is constantly things going on. You're floating in a zero-G environment. You have to stay strapped down. And if you look at pictures from most astronauts, they have eye mask on, earplugs in, earmuffs over the earplugs, trying to tone all of that out for the short amount of sleep that they get per day before they're back to work. But it's quite interesting. So they're constantly having to be ready to do something in the case of an emergency, but they also have to focus on, getting the sleep when they can in a very, very hostile and weird environment. And this next quote here is kind of an interesting thing that ties back a bit to what I mentioned with the overview effect, but it also relates to their bathroom situation. So I quote, "The idea of a national toilet has caused some amusement among the crew. I'm going to go take a national pee," Sean will say, or Roman, "Guys, I'm going to go and do one for Russia." So it kind of gets into this a bit. In this pseudo-fictional timeline, there's a lot of international animosity between the United States and Russia at the time this book takes place. And I believe this was written before the current political turmoil. So this was more of a guess than, a reality of the time. So it's very interesting, but they kind of go in and describe how Russia and the United States have gotten at each other's throats, and they're no longer allowed to use each other's facilities. You can't go use the Russian toilet if you're a NASA astronaut. You can't go use the American toilet if you're a Russian cosmonaut. None of that. We don't do that here. And they just do it anyway. They're all friends. They all have a lot of respect for one another. And they make jokes about it, So, they find their way around all of those interesting rules that are artificially presented to them. And then continuing on. So once again, their primary job here is not to, stare at the earth and be whimsical, though much of that does occur. They are primarily astronauts. They are astronauts. They have a job to do. They're the top scientists, the top engineers, the top pilots in the world. There's no one better than them. They are the top. So they are professionals. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes here. "Your days are laid out minute by minute in a schedule. You do somebody else's bidding, and you go to bed early and usually exhausted, and you get up early and start again. The only decision to be made is what to eat, and that too is limited." This kind of speaks to the structure. And there's actually an interesting kind of situation that occurred in early human space flight for these longer extended stays. So the United States' first space station in the 1970s was called Skylab. And they didn't give any time for breaks, rest, or relaxation. And for a couple days, the crew just turned off the comms and stopped working. Turned it back on again and said, "You can come get us if you you want us to start working again, or you can come up with a new schedule." And so they have kind of come forward and been a little more lenient on the astronauts in the future. So this schedule is very structured, but they've built in time for rest, relaxation. The exercise is a good time to clear the head. They're not required to be doing any tangential work. It's just focusing on their fitness. A lot of the other work too is structured in a way that it kind of comes and goes in tiers. In the book, there's a large section that I wanted to include, but I didn't find a good way to break it down. So I'll just start with the first quote from that section. "Day comes at them in a barrage." So right after they finish their morning workouts in the book, they are straight to work on the science. They're working on maintenance. They're working on research. They're testing biological samples. They're testing non-biological samples. They're testing the performance of different kind of physical phenomenon in space. they're maintaining certain parts of the vehicle. And so once again, their primary job is to be there as professional scientists and mechanics. They're conducting research in a variety of fields. Different research institutions globally spend millions and millions of dollars to try and get their tiny little experiment up there, and it's a very competitive wait list. And so their entire functionality is to effectively and quickly move through these scientific tasks. This is for the benefit of humanity. We need to keep going. It's, let's move, let's work. But additionally, like I mentioned earlier, they are flying in a giant vehicle that is always, always, always moving. So it is like trying to perform engine maintenance on your car while you're blistering down the interstate. They have to get outside their vehicle. They have to open up their power control units, replace batteries and stuff in flight. They have to go out and service engines. There's a whole variety of other things. Inside of the spacecraft, they have to service all of their interior components, air filters, the toilets, the water recyclers, all of this other components that are required for them to live. If they fail to maintain these components, they will die. So it is a very, very important thing that these people are very technically sound, able to make decisions on the fly, and just have a general understanding of the system around them. They train for better part of a decade before they're even allowed to set foot on this vehicle. So these are all very highly qualified people who are incredible at their job. So there's two through stories that kind of go on alongside the main kind of plot that kind of keep us on track. What's going on? So at the beginning of the day, the launch of what I presume to be, it's never mentioned by name, but what I presume to be Artemis 3 launches. And so I'm going to kind of go bottom to top here. So what the Artemis program is, it's an international effort to return humans to the moon for more permanent and extended habitation. So we have not been to the moon since 1972, I believe, with the last Apollo mission. In the next couple of years, we're looking to send the first crew back to the moon, which will be Artemis 2, theoretically this year. And then Artemis 3 will be the first one to land again on the moon. This book describes several folks who are going to the moon. They hear it over radio broadcasts. They think about them quite often throughout the book. I'm going to read the Russian quote here. No Russian mind should be steeped in these thoughts. There's no talk of it on their side, and silence is wholly begrudging. The 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th Americans to soon land on the moon's hallowed dusted crust, and yet still not a single Russian boot. So specifically why I think this is Artemis 3 is we have not been back to the moon, and we've sent 12 people. So if we have the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th, it must be the next one we're sending. So that would be Artemis 3. And so the mission feature in the book is a fictional, truly fictional Artemis 3 that features all US astronauts rather than an international crew that is planned. So the actual Artemis 3 that we're sending to the moon should include members from Canada and the European Union as well. So it should be a more international effort than our traditional, boots on the ground American moon missions of the 60s and 70s. But the other quote here, for today, a crew of 4 is on its way to the moon and has just surpassed the station's shallowing orbit, a distance of 250 miles above the planet. The lunar astronauts are catapulted past them in a $5 billion blaze of suited and booted glory. So this is kind of when they wake up and they're, thinking about what's going to happen today. And yeah, it's I think that this narrative here with the moon is kind of more to keep the narrative on track, kind of track where we are in the plot, where the lunar crew is moving, so we can see their progression and keep it kind of situated with what the main crew is experiencing throughout the course of the book. But I do find it fascinating to see. So this would theoretically place the date of this book somewhere in 2027, probably. So it is a speculative future. But as all things, who knows? Lots of launch delays, lots of cancellations in space flight. So this may be a true science fiction in the next 5 or so years. So the other through plot would be the typhoon. So the crew, when they wake up in the morning, is instructed to monitor a rapidly growing typhoon that is rushing towards the Philippines. It was not as high severity the day before as implied, but it appears to be picking up pace and is going to be a lot more impactful than they had initially thought. Several of the astronauts have interacted with people on the ground or know people on the ground who will be involved in this typhoon. I'm not going to go into those specific stories. I do recommend reading the book to kind of get those, personal narratives. But I'm going to read some of the quotes related to it. So today, there is one item of extra special interest list above all others: the typhoon moving over the Western Pacific towards Indonesia and the Philippines, which seems to have suddenly gathered force. And then quote, from space, the Philippines and Indonesia are shrouded in a fine arrangement of clouds, multiple vortices and eddies that will soon push westward. The typhoon has smashed itself to pieces against the land. The islands are smaller than they were several hours ago, and this happened by the flood. The worst is gone. So I think that this specific section of the plot was pulled from a real world event that happened in 2022. NASA astronauts observed a typhoon make landfall in the Philippines that killed several people. It was a very disastrous event. Centered, the two top pictures, so top and center picture there are view from space of a typhoon, and then the Philippines during said disastrous typhoon, experiencing the flooding and the devastation that occurred from that event. So that's one of the kind of interesting side projects, I suppose, that astronauts aboard the space station and many other space-based assets perform is disaster support. It's one of the things that space flight is really, really important for. So spacecraft and astronauts are often called upon to use their unique perspective to support disaster response. So it's really easy to be like, hey, astronaut on the space station, what do you see? What is below you? It's just a phone call away. They're constantly talking to mission control. So it's really easy to just say, hey, what do you see? There needs to be no special planning for that. All they have to do is look out their window and they can tell you what they see below them. For a typical spacecraft that doesn't have crew on board, that is sitting down, planning out your trajectory to make sure that you're going to actually overpass the planned location, writing up a proposed command list to actually move the spacecraft to stare at what you want it to look at, executing that command, waiting to get over another ground station, downlinking that data, bringing it in and reviewing that by trained professionals. The astronauts are the trained professionals. So they look, they know exactly what's going on. It's a lot shorter process. So that's why they are often used in this regard when we have so many more capable space-based assets for providing disaster support and relief. So yeah, like I said, astronauts in the ISS provided that support in the 2022 typhoon. And then a little bragging here, but bottom right, our company and several other companies use our space-based assets to image the Palisades and Eaton fires in Southern California. We're very close to those, so it was pretty high on the priority list for us to look at those. But in the bottom right, you can see photos that I took well, specifically the one on the right. So the photo on the right is in shortwave infrared. So that is color of light that is little longer wavelength than what we can see. And so what that allows us to do is look through smoke. And so when we're looking at fires on the ground, that's exactly what you want. We don't care about a huge smoke cloud. We care, where's the fire burning hot and where can we send first responders to go engage with that, and put out the growing fire. So on the left, we can see one of our other spacecraft, which is in the visible spectrum, a huge smoke cloud. This is the exact same moment from one of our other spacecrafts in shortwave infrared on the right, where you can see that huge hot spot burning just up in the mountains east of Malibu. So it's a very unique experience to be able to support relief efforts like that. And I think it's just one of the many facets in which spaceflight technology helps everyone in their day-to-day, right? Information like this saves lives. So it was cool to see that in the book and kind of represented as, the astronauts being able to give kind of real-time calls. So what? I think that this book kind of has two overarching so whats. So our place in the universe. The crew of the ISS performs like daunting and often thankless tasks of pushing the envelope of humans' exploration of the universe. So these people are up there. I assume no one here knows what they're doing right now, right? We don't know what they're working on, but you'll see the fruits of that labor. Every iPhone that's in this room is the result of NASA technology. Every solar panel powering the world today is the result of NASA research technology. Velcro was popularized, not invented, but popularized and used by NASA technology. There's myriad and countless things that the crew of the ISS and the crew of these spacecraft have brought to us through their research and dedication to the program. I think this work of literature does much to highlight the realities of these heroes and the experience, or how they experience their work and responsibility. So it's important to remember that these are people. They are the best and brightest of people, but they are people. They have a very human experience. They have, anxieties about what they're doing. They have loved ones at home that they think about. I think that is really highlighted in a way in this book, somewhat like I mentioned at the beginning, that you don't get out of technical documentation. You don't get out of crew logs. You don't get out of, summaries of expedition reports and stuff like that. This book does a great job of highlighting what they are feeling, what it is like to be in their shoes. I think that's incredibly important. And then, so Space for Earth, yes, supporting disaster relief and pursuing research in the unique environment of microgravity. Astronauts are making life better for everyone 250 miles below them. Crew, like all others, are humans with their own passions, dreams, fears, and insecurities. Once again, I think it just really makes it easy to connect with these people as people instead of mysterious entities who are out there exploring space. And that is all I have for you today. Are there any questions? Right there or behind you? Yes. Yes. So specifically the Russian segment of the International Space Station has these huge fuel tanks, and they got some rocket motors on there, right? And so you wouldn't know, but maybe intuitively know, but there is a little bit of air up there. Tiny little pieces of hydrogen and oxygen floating around up there, and those will hit your spacecraft, kind of like moving through the air down here, right? And over time, the spacecraft will slow down, right? And so as it slows down, it loses energy and starts to kind of fall like that cannonball in the arc, right? And over time, that orbit gets lower and lower. And so they have to boost and push themselves back up, continue speeding up to stay high up in that orbit. Does that answer your question? Yes, it's because of friction and air resistance and drag. Much like an airplane would experience, or your car on the highway. Sure. So restrictions on what the former astronauts can talk about. So my understanding is that specifically on missions like this, there's not a lot of restrictions. So because these programs are taxpayer funded, we have, as American citizens at least, right to access all the information that they gain and gather on these missions. So they're allowed to share just about anything. Really, you can listen to everything they say on the International Space Station when they're talking to each other. All of their crew logs are recorded. So it is a very not private environment. So they should, there are certain missions that certain countries have conducted in which were classified. So several shuttle missions were deploying spy satellites, other things like that. And the astronauts are not allowed to talk about anything that has a classification. But public service missions, anything that's unclassified, typically the astronauts are free to talk about all of that information. So, and it's mostly recorded if you know where to look. So did that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, cool. Okay, yeah. Oh, is a question? Sorry. Sorry, the author? Yeah, I believe that she did. I couldn't find any specific instances where she'd interviewed them, but like I said, they record everything that's online. So while she was writing the book, I did see that she sat there with the actual camera footage real time on the ISS and just watched what they did during their day, watched how they moved around, what they were doing for the research, what they were maintaining, and kind of wrote that into her book. So this was much like, I'd almost say a zookeeper, right? She watched them like a zookeeper would watch an animal in a cage and, wrote down what they were doing. So that was part of a large chunk of what she did for the book, but I don't believe that she actually interviewed astronauts. Sorry. Yeah. Back there.
What do you know about the two people that have stuff in space right
Sure.
now, and why didn't it look
Yep. So effectively it's kind of a twofold situation. So there are two companies in the United States that can bring astronauts to space, kind of. We'll get to that. SpaceX, and they have been regularly flying astronauts since 2020 to the International Space Station. They're the primary transporter. Boeing also has a vehicle that is semi-functional. In the first, yeah, in the first, the first vehicle or the first trip that was actually bringing astronauts to the ISS was Suni and Butch. I believe are the two astronauts who are stuck there right now. But they flew up as test pilots, so they're very experienced test pilots. They flew that vehicle up there, docked with it. They were supposed to stay for 8 days, make sure it talked to all the systems. They found a bunch of problems with the vehicle. They sent the vehicle back on its own. It could autonomously land, so it didn't need crew intervention. And they found even more issues after it undocked. And so they were very happy that they were not on board, but it did make it safely to Earth, just no crew aboard. And so NASA had a couple of decisions. Were they going to spend the money to send a dedicated mission to go get them right now? That's a 9-figure effort, quite an expensive thing, especially considering there's no real return on investment. You're just going to get those astronauts when they're going to come down. You're not doing science. You're not expanding human knowledge. They're safe up there. They can live up there. The nice thing about the Dragon that was also docked, which is the SpaceX vehicle, which is also docked, is they had two basically jump seats they could pop out. Not ideal, but they could pop those out in case they needed to bring them back on that. So they always had a way to get home. And so what they decided was, okay, on our next Dragon launch, we're going to send 2 astronauts, leave 2 seats fully open, bring them some more gear, and they're just going to join the crew rotation like normal. So they're up there in their current crew rotation, acting as normal astronauts would on the mission. So they're going to come down with the next crew that's coming down, just as they normally would. They were never stranded. They were never in an unsafe situation, except maybe when they're on the Boeing vehicle on their way up. But beyond that, it's they're in a very stable situation. Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Yes. Sure. Yep. Yeah. Sure. Okay. This is actually kind of my specialty. My focus in grad school is propulsion engineering. So it's a variety. That's the easiest way to put it. So for specifically in Bill Anders' situation, he would have been on the Saturn V. So the first stage of that would have been, I believe, kerosene and liquid oxygen, really refined kerosene, but kerosene, and liquid oxygen. The second stage would have been liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, so mixing those together to burn. And then the next stage, also liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. And then up there, the actual lunar lander and the command module that orbited the moon, those had something called hypergolic propellants, which is a fancy way for saying when they touch, they go boom. And so that would have been monomethyl hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide, because that'll clarify it for all of you guys. But does that answer your question? Sure. Yeah. So I can speculate, but it's likely very similar to what they used in the actual lunar lander, like I was saying. So that would have probably been either monomethyl hydrazine, and likely nitrogen tetroxide as the oxidizer for that fuel pairing. The reason that we use those, they're incredibly corrosive, incredibly dangerous, but they don't boil. So when you turn oxygen and hydrogen into a liquid, it doesn't like being a liquid. It wants to expand back into a gas, especially when it's near human rated temperatures and human rated pressures. But monomethyl hydrazine and hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide, you can have a cup of that on the desk. It just sits there. It's fine. It's happy. And so it's much easier to store that for the years the ISS has been up there. It's much easier to pump that in space and just manage it as a fuel source. So it's not as efficient as some other fuels, but it's very, very easy to store and keep. So, yep. Mm-hmm. All right. Yes. Yes. Sure. Sure. Yeah. So there's an incredible study between two astronauts, two NASA astronauts who are twins, identical twins. One stayed on the ground in a very controlled environment at Johnson Space Center, and the other spent a year on the ISS. So normal crew rotation is 6 to 9 months. So he stayed up there way in excess of what we typically spend on the International Space Station. And when he came down, they did genetic comparisons, they did bone comparisons, they did muscle comparisons. And basically they had them in the exact same shape when he went up, and they brought them down and just did a 1-to-1 comparison. It was an incredible opportunity. Yeah, I believe one of those astronauts is now a senator. Yeah, Senator Kelly. So Arizona, I believe. Yeah, so they found some interesting things. I am not a physician, so this is a bit outside of my realm of expertise, but they found lengthening of telomeres, which are a component of your body that kind of determines how long you can live. And they found that they lengthened instead of shrunk. Shrunk is bad, lengthened is good, I guess. So potential anti-aging effects of being in a zero-G environment. They found pretty much standard and expected muscle and bone deterioration. The Russians had sent up somebody for a year before him. So he was not the first to spend that amount of time in space. So general physiological effects were pretty well understood, but it was more that genetic stuff that they were interested in that case. What was changing kind of on the micro level. But yeah, typically if you're up there for like a year, you're going to see significant bone loss and degradation. He came down, and I mean, you know, they had him in a little wheelchair for a bit. You know, you have to do gravity exercises to kind of get back to standing when you're up there that long. And it's important because any crews that would go to Mars are going to be one way for about a year. You know, 6 months to a year. So it's important research. That's why we're studying it. Any other questions? Yes.
One of those quotes at the beginning, I think, simply affects your review.
Yes. So once again, I'm not a doctor, yeah, physician. But my understanding is our eyes rely quite a bit on having all the fluids in them pulled down, and the shape of our eyes is built to kind of expect that gravity and pull down into a circle. So when you don't have gravity, they kind of bow out into these like ellipses instead of perfect circles, and the fluids just kind of float around in there. So no one goes blind from it, but it is one of those things where it's like you'll have strained vision and things will look a little woozy, and it's well understood at this point, but it is definitely something that we cannot really do anything about. It's just, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Right.
They come back and I've read an article, they have puffy faces.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, because I mean, you've got 9.8 meters per second of gravity pulling you down at all times. All your blood's going to your feet. And so it also hurts the sense of smell because you've got all this extra fluid up in your face. It puffs up your sinuses and it's hard to taste things and smell things, which is probably a good thing when you're in a confined space with recycled air. But, you know, yeah.
You know, the smell of the space station, like, you know, like an open dock locker.
Yeah. Yep. Right. Oh, yeah. You don't get regular resupplies on your trip to Mars. It's yeah.
You just can't stop before we quit. Get that out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's a very interesting, yeah, but fantastic question for sure. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.